Hey there, and welcome. Have you ever just stopped and wondered, how do we become who we are? How are our minds, our sense of right and wrong, actually put together? Well, today, we're grabbing the blueprints to figure out exactly that, how our minds and morals are constructed piece by piece.
So let's just get right to the heart of it. How is a mind built? Is it something we're born with, like a prefabricated house all ready to go? Or is it more like a custom construction project that we work on our entire lives? That's the big mystery we're going to unpack right now.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at this idea of the mind as a project, which introduces a huge concept called constructivism. Then we'll meet our master builders, Piaget, the individual architect, Vygotsky, the guy with the social blueprint, and Kohlberg, who helps us build our morals. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see why these blueprints really matter for all of us.
Okay, first things first. Before we can talk about the builders, we've got to lay the foundation. And to do that, we need to get our heads around this really revolutionary idea called constructivism.
This was a massive shift in thinking. For literally centuries, people thought knowledge was just poured into our heads, like filling an empty glass. But constructivism completely flips that script. It says, no way. We aren't just passive containers. We are the builders, actively constructing our own understanding of everything around us.
And this isn't just some vague philosophy, it's got a really solid framework. It's all based on a few core ideas. That every single one of us is an active builder, not just a bystander. That our thinking is always adapting and changing with new info. And this is a big one. It recognizes that because we all have unique experiences, we each build a slightly different reality. Knowledge isn't just sitting in a book, it's something we build within our social world.
So with that foundation in place, let's meet our first master builder. We're going to start with Jean Piaget, who saw this whole construction project as a really personal one-person job.
Piaget was a total game changer. He basically believed that kids are like little scientists. They're out there exploring the world on their own, constantly running little experiments and building their understanding from the ground up. In his view, the mind's construction site, it's a solo project, driven entirely by your own curiosity and discovery.
But hang on, what if you're not building alone? Let's bring in our next theorist, Lev Vygotsky, who had a totally different picture of how this works. For him, building a mind was all about teamwork.
So, get this, Vygotsky was born in the exact same year as Piaget, but his take was way different. He argued that we don't build our minds in a vacuum. Nope. We co-construct our knowledge with our social crew. Our parents, our teachers, our friends. Our culture and all those interactions, they provide the crucial scaffolding that lets us build our minds higher and stronger.
And this right here shows the two competing blueprints perfectly. On one side, you've got Piaget's vision, the lone architect, figuring it all out for themselves. But on the other side, you have Vygotsky's vision, a busy construction site where the whole community is pitching in to help. And this difference is absolutely huge for things like education. Do you let a kid discover something all on their own, or do you guide them with help from others? Both see us as builders, but they totally disagree on whether it's a solo job or a team project. Okay, so we've looked at the blueprints for how we build what we know, but what about the framework that guides what we do? It's time to bring in our final theorist, Lawrence Kohlberg, who focused on how we actually construct our moral compass. Kohlberg basically took this whole idea of constructivism and applied it to our morality. He suggested that our sense of right and wrong isn't just handed to us. It's something we build and refine our whole lives, developing more and more complex ways of thinking about really tough moral questions.
And Kohlberg saw this as a clear construction process. We start by pouring a simple foundation of rules, mostly based on how do I avoid getting in trouble. Then we start putting up the framing of the house, which is all about understanding social rules and laws. But the final, most complex part is finishing the interior with our own personal principles. A moral compass built not on outside rules, but on what we truly believe inside.
So, we've got these fascinating blueprints from Piaget, Vygotsky, and Kohlberg. But why do they matter to us right here, right now? Let's get to the big takeaway.
This quote really gets to the heart of it all, doesn't it? We aren't just passive recipients of some pre-made identity. The ultimate point is this. Every single day, we are the lead architects on the project of building who we are. It's a lifelong construction project.
And once you grasp that, it really changes everything. It totally transforms how we think about education. Should we just give students facts, or should we give them the tools to build their own knowledge? It helps us make sense of our own growth, reminding us that the construction is never really done. But more than anything, it's empowering.
It shows us that we have the creativity of an individual architect, but also the strength of a whole collaborative construction crew. So I'll leave you with this one question to think about. If your mind is a construction site and you're the master builder holding the blueprints, what are you choosing to build today? Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're diving into what is, no joke, one of the most incredible journeys any human ever takes, the first 2 years of life. Seriously, it's this period of epic discovery, where a newborn goes from just a bundle of reflexes to a tiny thinker who is starting to figure out the fundamental rules of reality itself. So that really is the central question, isn't it? I mean, how on earth does a mind with zero prior experience, zero data, build a working model of the world? It sounds impossible. Well, let's find out. Our guide for this quest is the legendary psychologist Jean Piaget. He called this first absolutely crucial chapter of our cognitive development the sensorimotor stage. Think of it as the foundation. Everything, and I mean everything, else is built on top of this. So what does sensorimotor actually mean? Well, for the first 2 years, a baby is basically a tiny scientist. But their lab equipment? It's their own body. They learn about the world by touching, tasting, seeing, hearing, and moving. Everything is an experiment, and every single sensation is a piece of data. Okay, so let's break down that wild first year. You can almost think of it as a baby slowly discovering their own superpowers. They are not just lying there, not at all. They are actively, constantly figuring out how to control their bodies and, pretty soon, the world around them. Now, Piaget broke this whole quest down into 6 distinct substages, kind of like levels in a video game. We start with the basics, reflexes, then move through a few different kinds of reactions, learn about coordination, and finally, we arrive at early thought. Each stage builds on the one before it, unlocking a more and more complex understanding of reality. So let's walk through. We're starting at the very, very beginning, the first month of life. In this phase, it's all about instinct. The baby isn't choosing to do anything. They are simply reacting to the world. These inborn reflexes, things like sucking, grasping, and just looking around, are literally the only tools they have to interact with this brand new, totally overwhelming world. These are the absolute fundamental building blocks of understanding. All right, now in stage 2, between 1 and 4 months, something pretty amazing starts to happen. The baby starts connecting their own actions with new sensations, and they begin to form their first mental blueprints, what Piaget called schemas. The key here is why they do it. So a baby might accidentally get their thumb in their mouth. And hey, that feels good. So what do? They try to do it again, and again, and again. See? They're coordinating a physical action with a pleasant sensation, forming their very first intentional habits, and it's all focused on their own body. Now, from 4 to 8 months, the baby's focus starts to shift outward. They've kind of figured out their own body a little bit, and now they're ready to start making things happen in the world around them. And this is a huge leap. The baby now gets cause and effect. Hey, if I shake this thing, it makes that cool rattle noise. They're not just exploring their own thumb anymore. They're realizing they can actually make things happen out there. They're becoming an active agent in their world. So, as we get close to that 1-year mark, we hit another major milestone. The baby's actions become way more deliberate, much more goal-oriented. And this is the crucial part. We now see planning. A baby might see a toy they really want, but, oh no, another toy is in the way. For the very first time, they can come up with a plan. I will push that boring block aside so that I can grab that awesome rattle. This separation of the goal from the action, that's the real beginning of problem solving. So, as we enter the second year, the baby fully embraces their role as the little scientist. Their main goal now? To experiment with absolutely everything and figure out how it all works through active, hands-on research. This next stage, which Piaget called the trial and error phase, is 100% driven by curiosity. You can really see that new scientific mindset on full display here. They're not just repeating the same old actions that they know work. They're trying new things just to see what happens. So, dropping a spoon makes a loud clang. Okay, what about the peas? What about the cup? Every single drop is a tiny experiment in gravity and sound. And here we are. We've reached the final substage of this quest, and trust me, it's a total game changer. This is where the action moves from the outside world into the mind. Think about it. Up until now, all the learning has been physical, doing things to see what happens.
But now the child starts to form mental symbols, little ideas in their head. They can start to think about things that aren't even right there in front of them, which leads us to the final boss battle of the sensorimotor stage.
The ultimate achievement of these entire first 2 years is conquering this one concept, object permanence. This is the big one. It's the fundamental understanding that things continue to exist even when you can't see, hear, or touch them.
For a young infant, reality is only what they can directly perceive. So if you take their favorite teddy bear and hide it under a blanket, for them, it's not hidden. It is literally vanished from the universe. Out of sight is truly, completely out of mind.
But by the end of this stage, everything has changed. You hide that same toy, and now the child has a mental picture of it in their head. They know the toy is still there, under that blanket, and they will actively search for it. They have defeated the out-of-sight, out-of-mind boss. They understand that things are permanent.
So let's step back. In just 2 short years, our tiny hero has completed this incredible quest and unlocked the core principles of physical reality.
Let's recap the powers they've unlocked on this journey. They get object permanence. Things exist even when unseen. They can use goal-directed action to solve problems. They can learn by imitating others. And maybe most important of all, they've started using early representational thought. This new ability to think in symbols, that is the critical foundation for everything that's coming next. Language, memory, and all sorts of abstract ideas.
So, they've mastered the rules of things they can touch and see. But an entirely new universe is just starting to open up inside their own mind. The sensorimotor quest is complete, but the much, much bigger adventure into the world of symbols, language, and imagination, that is just about to begin.
Have you ever just stopped and wondered how a tiny baby, goes from this world of just blurry shapes and sounds to actually understanding complex ideas? It's pretty amazing, right? Well, today we're going to dive right into the brilliant mind of Jean Piaget and unpack the mental toolkit that, believe it or not, we all use to build our own reality.
So here's what we've got on top. First, we're going to meet the architect of this whole theory, Jean Piaget himself. Then we'll get into the real nitty-gritty, the mental building blocks he called schemas. After that, we'll see how we adapt our thinking, and finally, we'll uncover the secret driving force that keeps our minds, in balance.
All right, first up, the man behind it all.
The person who asked this question was a Swiss thinker named Jean Piaget. And get this, he dedicated his entire life to solving this one single fundamental mystery. How on earth does a child go from knowing basically nothing to making sense of our incredibly complex world?
And Piaget's approach, it was absolutely revolutionary for its time. He didn't see children as, these empty little sponges just soaking up information. No way. He saw them as active scientists, little builders constructing their own understanding of the world. And what's really interesting is that he started out as a zoologist. It was when he was working on some of the first intelligence tests that he had this huge aha moment. He realized he wasn't interested in when kids got the answers right. He was fascinated by their wrong answers, because those mistakes showed that kids have this amazing, consistent logic that's all their own.
So he gave his big theory this really fancy name, genetic epistemology. I know, it sounds super intimidating, but stick with me, it's actually way simpler than it sounds. Genetic, in this case, doesn't mean DNA or genes. It just means origins or development. And epistemology is just a fancy word for the study of knowledge. So put it together, and Piaget was basically studying the origin of how we know what we know. He had this core belief that the fundamental tools we use to learn are just built right into our biology.
Okay, so if we have these built-in tools, what exactly are they? Well, let's get to the very first and most important piece of the puzzle. We're talking about the basic building blocks of our mental world, something Piaget called schemas.
Right. So at the absolute heart of Piaget's theory is this idea of the schema. What is it? You can think of it like a mental blueprint, or maybe a category. It's a little system we create in our heads to organize all the information and experiences we have. It's basically the brain's way of taking all the chaos of the outside world and sorting it into nice, neat, understandable chunks.
The easiest way to picture a schema is to think of it like a mental filing cabinet. Seriously, imagine you have a cabinet in your brain. One folder is labeled dog, and inside that folder you file everything you know about dogs. They have 4 legs, they have fur, they bark, they fetch. You've got another folder for toys, one for food. You get the idea, a folder for everything you know.
Okay, so we've got these mental filing cabinets. That makes sense. But how do we actually fill them up? And here's the really important question. What happens when we come across a piece of information that just doesn't fit? Like, there's no folder for it. What then?
Well, Piaget had a name for this whole process. He called it adaptation. It's how we're constantly adjusting and fine-tuning those mental filing cabinets as we go through life. And to do all this adjusting, our brain uses two really specific and really powerful tools.
And these two tools are called assimilation and accommodation. Now, I know they sound kind of similar, but trust me, they do two very different and absolutely crucial jobs when it comes to how we learn.
So let's really zoom in and break these two down, because this push and pull, between just fitting new stuff into what we already know versus actually having to change our thinking, that's where all the magic of learning really happens.
All right, let's start with assimilation. This is the easy one. Think of it as just taking a new piece of info and dropping it into a filing cabinet folder that's already there. So a little kid who knows what a dog is sees a golden retriever for the first time. Easy. It fits right into their dog folder. No problem. But then there's accommodation, and that is the real mental workout. This is what happens when you run into something so new and different that it forces you to either completely change an existing folder or maybe even create a brand new one from scratch.
Here's a great example. A kid learns to ride a big wheel. Then they get a tricycle. They can easily assimilate that, right? It's pretty much the same deal. Pedals, handlebars, but then they get a two-wheeled bicycle. Whoa, that requires a complete overhaul of their riding toy schema. They have to deal with this whole new concept of balance. That, my friends, is accommodation. Or think about it this way. Moving into a new house. That's like assimilation. You're just taking your stuff and putting it into a structure that already exists. But what if you renovate the house? You knock down a wall to make the kitchen bigger? That's accommodation. You are fundamentally changing the structure itself to fit what you need now.
So that begs the question, right? Why do we bother with all this hard mental work, especially accommodation? That sounds tough. What is the driving force? What pushes our brains to constantly rebuild and reorganize everything?
It all starts with a feeling that Piaget called disequilibrium. You know this feeling. It's that moment of mental friction, that, wait a minute, what? Moment when something you see just doesn't line up with what you thought you knew. Imagine a kid who's only ever seen dogs. They see a cat for the first time, and they point and yell, "Doggy!" That confusion, right there, is disequilibrium in action. Their dog filing folder just failed them, and their brain knows it.
And that feeling of imbalance, you can think of it like a mental itch that you just have to scratch. And that itch is the true engine of all learning. It's this natural state of discomfort that our brains are literally hardwired to fix. We are driven, from the inside out, to find a balance between what's in our heads and what the world is showing us.
So all of this creates this really powerful constant cycle of learning. Step 1, a new situation comes along and throws us off balance, into disequilibrium. Step 2, we pull out our mental toolkit. We try to assimilate, maybe we have to accommodate. And then, step 3, once we've worked it out, we achieve a new, more stable, more sophisticated state of balance. And Piaget had a name for that too, equilibrium.
And this whole process, this whole journey of moving from being off balance back to being balanced, that is what Piaget called equilibration. And for him, this wasn't just a part of learning. No, this was the master process. It's the engine that drives all of our cognitive growth, from the moment we say our first words all the way up to our most complex, abstract ideas. It's our brain's constant, unending quest to find harmony.
But here's the kicker. This whole framework, it doesn't just apply to little kids. It applies to all of us, every single day. Every time you learn a new skill at work, or you encounter a totally different culture, or you challenge a belief you've held for years, you are using these exact same tools, assimilation and accommodation. And that leaves us with a pretty interesting question to think about, doesn't it? What schemas are shaping your world right now? What things are you just easily assimilating without a second thought? And what new idea might be out there, waiting to make you do the hard work of accommodation to truly understand it?
Hello and welcome. Today we are diving deep into the absolutely fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes totally baffling world of a young child's mind. We're going to see how they think, how they see, and how they make sense of it all. Right? Or why they will argue to the death that a tall, skinny glass has more juice than a short, fat one, even though you poured it right in front of them. Yeah, if you've ever been around a preschooler, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's this incredible world of unique logic and wild imagination. So to really wrap our heads around this, we're going to follow a little guide for the day. We're going to see things exactly as they do. Trust me, it's the best way to really get what's going on inside that amazing developing brain. So what's the official term for this period of development? Well, the legendary psychologist Jean Piaget gave it a name. He called it the pre-operational stage. It basically means before logical operations, which, as you'll see, is the perfect description. And Piaget, being super thorough, actually split this stage into two smaller chunks. First, from about age 2 to 4, you have the preconceptual substage. This is where that symbolic thinking and imagination just explodes. Then, from 4 to 7, we get the intuitive substage. This is where they start trying to reason, but it's all based on gut feelings, not the kind of step-by-step logic we use. So let's dive into the first big idea of this stage, and it is a big one. For preschooler, the world doesn't just revolve around the sun. Nope, it revolves entirely around them. We have all seen this, the classic game of hide and seek, where a kid just covers their own eyes, 100% convinced that if they can't see you, there's no way you can see them. It's super adorable, and it's also a perfect little window into how they think. Now, this isn't selfishness, not in the way we think about it. It's a cognitive feature called egocentrism. They literally don't have the mental hardware yet to imagine a point of view that isn't their own. In their mind, their perspective is the only perspective. That's it. And this egocentrism explains something else you've probably seen. Ever listen to a group of 4-year-olds chatting? One is talking about his dog, the other is talking about a cartoon she saw, and a third is going on about his new shoes. They're all talking at the same time, but nobody is really listening or responding to anyone else. Piaget had a perfect name for this, a collective monologue. Okay, so building on that unique worldview, we're now entering a truly magical place. A place where the whole world is alive. Picture this. Our little guide accidentally bumps into a table. But instead of rubbing their own knee, they start comforting the table, patting it and saying, "Don't cry, table." Why? Because in their world, of course the table feels pain. Just like they do. This is called animism. It's the belief that pretty much everything has feelings, thoughts, and intentions. A car that won't start isn't just broken, it might be sleepy or tired. They're projecting their own consciousness onto everything around them. And all this imaginative thinking is actually the engine for a huge cognitive leap, symbolism. This is the amazing ability to let one thing stand in for another. It's the whole basis for pretend play, where a banana becomes a telephone or a cardboard box is a spaceship. And this is so critical because it's the very same engine that powers language, where sounds and words start to represent real things. Okay, so their imaginations are off the charts. But when it comes to the kind of straight-line logic that we adults rely on, well, that's where things get a little tricky. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, imagine this classic experiment. We start with 2 glasses. They're identical, short, wide, and filled with the exact same amount of water. We ask our little guide which one has more, and they'll look and say, they're the same. Easy enough, right? But now, watch this. We take one of those glasses, and right there in front of them, we pour all of the water into a new glass, a tall, skinny one. The amount of water is exactly the same, we just changed its shape. And then we ask that million-dollar question. Okay, now which one has more water? And almost every single time, without even hesitating, they'll point right at the tall, skinny glass and say, that one. To them, it's just obvious. This classic mistake shows something Piaget called a lack of conservation. It's the inability to get that a quantity, like water or pennies or clay, stays the same even when you change its appearance. Their brain just gets stuck on the one thing that stands out the most, in this case, the height, and they conclude taller must mean more. This is like a kind of one-way street in their thinking, and it's why reversing any process is so hard for them. Think about it. They can learn to count from 1 to 10 pretty easily, but asking them to count backwards from 10 to 1? Whoa. That is a massive mental challenge, because it means they have to mentally reverse a process they've learned going forward. Okay, so now that we've had a peek inside their incredible world, what does all of this mean for us? For the parents, the teachers, the grown-ups? How can we actually support these amazing little thinkers? Well, here are the big takeaways. Since their thinking is so concrete, you've got to lean into visuals and hands-on stuff. Keep your instructions short, simple, and action-based. And embrace play. Seriously, dress up and pretend is not just a game, it is a powerful teaching tool. Let them explore with things like sand and water and blocks to build those really basic concepts. And try to connect whatever you're teaching to their own real life. But maybe most importantly, just remember their perspective is fundamentally different from yours, and that's okay. And this is really the whole point. This stage isn't a list of things they get wrong. It's not a deficit. It's a totally different and completely necessary operating system for the brain. It's this world of magic and symbols and me first that actually builds the entire foundation for all the complex, logical thinking that's coming later. So I'll leave you with this to think about. The next time a kid tells you their doll is feeling sad or that the tall glass has way more juice, how can we shift our own thinking? How can we stop seeing it as a mistake that needs correcting and start seeing it for what it really is? A beautiful, fleeting window into an absolutely incredible way of seeing the world.
You know that moment when a kid's brain just seems to flip a switch? One day it's all about magical thinking, and the next, they're starting to make actual, logical sense of the world? Well, today, we're diving right into that incredible transformation. We're talking about the moment a kid's brain truly, and I mean truly, levels up.
I mean, we've all seen it, right? You take two perfectly matched rows of pencils, you just spread one of them out a little, and a 5-year-old will look you dead in the eye and say, that one has more. It seems totally baffling to us, but it's actually the perfect window into a mind that's playing by a completely different set of rules. So today, we're going to crack the code and figure out the logic behind this classic little puzzle.
Okay, so to really get how big this leap is, we've got to first understand where they're leaping from. And let me tell you, it's a world that runs on pure magic and perception.
Before they hit about 7, a kid's world is really shaped by two big ideas. First up, you've got egocentrism. That's this rock-solid belief that you, me, everyone, we all see the world exactly the way they do. And then there's animism, the super charming idea that everything has feelings. Their favorite teddy bear, oh, it definitely gets lonely. In this kind of world, what you see is what you get. Perception is reality. If it looks bigger, well, then it is bigger. End of story.
But then, something happens. And it is not a small step, folks. It's a massive cognitive upgrade. We are talking about the Great Concrete Leap, a complete, fundamental shift in how their brain even begins to process the physical world around them.
So when does this happen? Well, this major level up usually kicks in somewhere between the ages of 7 and 11. This is the sweet spot, the key window, where the real foundations for logical thinking get laid down.
Now, the official name for this whole thing is the concrete operational stage. And that word concrete is everything. It's like kids become these little scientists, but their lab is the real physical world. They can start to think logically about anything they can literally see, touch, or move around. But ask them about abstract stuff like justice or freedom, yeah, that's still pretty tricky for them.
And this comparison right here really shows you the before and after. It's night and day. You go from this magical, what I see is real thinking to something much more rational and logical. The world stops being just about what it looks like and starts being about what they know to be true, based on actual reason. It's a complete system overhaul for their brain.
So what's actually powering this great leap forward? Well, it all comes down to getting a brand new mental toolkit. Think of it like a set of cognitive superpowers that just completely change the game. So let's open up the toolbox and see what's inside.
Okay, the number one superpower, the real game changer, is something called conservation. All this means is they finally get that quantity, number, volume, weight. It doesn't just change because you make it look different. It's this incredible new ability to see past what their eyes are telling them and instead trust pure logic. And conservation isn't just one thing. It's actually powered by 3 amazing new mental tricks. First, you've got identity. That's just knowing, hey, nobody added any pencils or took any away. Simple. Then there's compensation. That's where they can think, okay, yeah, the row got longer, but the spaces between the pencils also got bigger. And finally, the coolest one, reversibility. This is the ability to hit rewind in their minds, to mentally picture pushing those pencils right back together and realizing, yep, it's the same amount. All right, so let's circle back to our pencil problem from the beginning. Now that they're armed with these new tools, a kid in this stage can totally crack it. They see the 2 rows, they see one get spread out, but now their brain kicks in and says, whoa, hold on a sec. Nothing was added or taken away. That's identity. And I can just imagine pushing them back together. That's reversibility. So the number has to be the same. Boom. Logic totally beats what their eyes are trying to tell them.
And this new logical thinking isn't a one-trick pony. Oh no, it also unlocks other cool abilities. like classification. Finally being able to sort all their toys into neat piles of animals and cars. And then there's seriation, which is just putting things in a logical order, like lining up blocks from the smallest to the biggest. All of a sudden, their entire world just starts to feel a lot more organized.
Okay, so this is all super fascinating brain science, right? But why does any of it actually matter in the real world? Well, it matters a ton. Because getting a handle on this leap is absolutely crucial if you're a parent, a teacher, really anyone who wants to help a kid learn.
Here's the bottom line. You have to teach to the brain they have right now, not the one they'll have later. For kids in this stage, hands-on experience is everything. It's king. This is exactly why learning math with physical blocks works so well, or why a simple science experiment makes an idea stick way better than a book. Trying to give them a big, abstract lecture, it's just going to go in one ear and out the other. We've got to give these new little logicians things they can actually see, touch, and, well, get their hands on.
And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. This whole process isn't just about kids getting smarter. It's so much bigger than that. It's like they are booting up a brand new operating system for understanding reality itself. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Now that you know how their brain is working, how can you better support that little scientist in your life?
Today, we are diving into one of the most incredible transformations in human development. We're talking about the moment a young person's brain gets what feels like a massive software update. This is Jean Piaget's final stage of cognitive development, and it's what unlocks that complex, sometimes confusing, but always fascinating teenage mind. So, have you ever wondered why a teenager can suddenly go from talking about, what's for dinner, to debating the meaning of justice? Or why they seem to be living in this world of infinite what-ifs? Well, Piaget's theory gives us a fantastic framework for understanding this really dramatic and, let's be honest, sometimes baffling shift. So, this all starts with a fundamental leap, removing from a world that's tangible and physical to one that's built on ideas, possibilities, and pure logic. It's like a complete change in the mind's operating system. And here it is, the formal operational stage. It usually kicks in around age 11, and it's the fourth and final stage in Piaget's whole theory. This is where the mind learns to work with abstract concepts, things you can't see or touch, like algebra, variables, or big philosophical ideals. And this right here shows the core difference perfectly. Before this stage, thinking is really concrete, it's focused on the here and now, on what is. But formal operational thought, that just throws open the door to what if. It's this brand new ability to reason beyond what's right in front of you. And this is the result. A whole universe of potential outcomes and ideas just opens up. This is exactly why they can get lost in thought, imagining different futures, or even creating these ideal worlds. In fact, they can get so invested in this imaginative world that sometimes they kind of lose touch with the real one. So, what's the new tool that's powering this abstract engine? Well, it's a much more systematic and logical way of approaching problems. It's almost scientific in its method. The key is something Piaget called hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Okay, I know it's a fancy term, but it really just means thinking like a scientist. Instead of simple trial and error, an adolescent can now look at a problem by considering all the possible variables and then logically deduce solution. The important thing to get here is that this is a structured process. As you can see, first, they identify every single potential factor. Then they come up with hypotheses or, possible solutions. And finally, they test them logically to figure out which one actually works. It's a huge upgrade from just reacting to what's in front of you. But here's where things get really fascinating, a little bit of a paradox. As the teenage brain gets more powerful and capable of thinking about what other people are thinking, it can also lead to this new, intense self-consciousness. So how does being smarter actually make you feel like you're always under a spotlight? Well, it comes down to something called adolescent egocentrism. Now hold on, this is not the same thing as a toddler thinking the world revolves around them. It's way more subtle. It's this powerful assumption that your internal world, your thoughts, your feelings, your anxieties, are just as intense and interesting to everyone else as they are to you. And this quote just brilliantly illustrates that feeling. Because they can now think about what other people might be thinking, they start to assume that everyone is constantly analyzing their every single move. It's the cognitive fuel for feeling like you're always on stage. Piaget actually had a great name for this phenomenon, the imaginary audience. It's that feeling that a whole crowd of people is watching and judging you, even when you're just, walking down the hall at school. This audience is a direct creation of their new abstract thinking skills. And we see this play out in really common behaviors, right? That constant feeling of being watched, the frustration when they think, why doesn't anyone get it? Because to them, their perspective should be obvious to everyone. And of course, spending ages in front of the mirror getting ready for their big performance in front of that imaginary audience.
Okay, so we've got the theory down, but what does it all mean in practice? How can parents and educators actually support this powerful new stage of thinking? This is the so what, the practical application of all this amazing theory. This gives us a really clear roadmap. We need to be challenging them with abstract problems and all sorts of what-if scenarios. We need to encourage imagination, push them beyond just memorizing facts, and let them come up with their own questions. And look at that last point, using discussion forums to solve problems scientifically. That is fantastic because it directly taps into their new hypothetical deductive reasoning skills, letting them test ideas and build arguments together. And the key takeaway here is that this isn't about throwing out the old ways of thinking. Not at all. It's about building a bridge. We still need to use concrete objects and real-world experiences to help anchor these new complex, abstract ideas. It's all about connecting the world of what is to the exciting new world of what if. And that brings us to our final thought. This cognitive leap is just incredible. It unlocks the potential for scientific discovery, for deep philosophical debate, for amazing artistic creation. But it also comes with new challenges. So the question we're really left with is this: how do we guide adolescents to use this powerful new way of thinking, not just effectively, but wisely?